December 17, 1944. The dense, bitter cold of the Ardennes forest in Belgium hung in the air like a silent assassin. Snowflakes fell softly, gathering on the branches of leafless trees and blanketing the muddy forest floor. The quiet was eerie, broken only by the occasional crackling of distant artillery fire or the whisper of boots scraping through snow. In this hellish stretch of the Battle of the Bulge, American soldiers, exhausted, frostbitten, and stretched thin, had little left to give. But they were far from defeated. Among them, Sergeant John "Jack" Mitchell tightened his grip around the worn wooden stock of his Model 97 trench shotgun. The weapon, which had seen better days, was a far cry from the polished M1 Garands that many of his fellow soldiers carried. To the German paratroopers lurking in the shadows, the shotgun was little more than a crude tool, one more fitting for a farmer than a soldier. They scoffed at the weapon, calling it uncivilized, a toy compared to the precision of their Mauser rifles or the fearsome firepower of the Sturmgewehr 44. But Mitchell knew better. The shotgun, with its short barrel and devastating spread, was perfect for close-quarters combat. In the dense forests where visibility was limited to a few feet, the shotgun was a beast, capable of ending a life in an instant, even if you couldn't see your target clearly. The German soldiers may have mocked it, but in the hedgerows and forests of the Ardennes, it had proved deadly time and again. Jack had spent the last few weeks on the front lines, entrenched in the brutal fighting that had come with the surprise German offensive. He had seen men fall beside him, friends he had grown up with, their lives snuffed out in a heartbeat. But it wasn't just the cold that gnawed at his bones. It was the fear that twisted deep in his gut every time he heard the crackle of distant radio chatter or the hollow thud of enemy mortars exploding nearby. That night, as Jack and his squad huddled in a makeshift foxhole, the weight of the war pressing on them, there was a growing sense of unease. The Germans had been moving closer, their paratroopers sneaking through the snow-covered terrain, intent on flushing out the Americans hidden in the shadows. The quiet had begun to feel more like a predator's patience, and Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to explode. It was only a matter of time. Jack glanced at his weapon, the trench shotgun, and then back at the men in his squad. They were looking to him for guidance, as they always did. He wasn't sure if it was because of his rank or because he'd earned their trust. But he knew one thing: the men would follow his lead, whether they had faith in the shotgun or not. The night was thick with tension, and it wasn't long before the first crack of gunfire split the air, just a prelude to the storm that was about to come. A sudden movement caught Jack's eye: two figures, barely visible in the darkness, creeping along the edge of the forest. They were German paratroopers, their dark green uniforms blending with the shadows, their weapons raised in silence as they stalked the American position. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, his instincts kicking in. He didn't hesitate. He swung the shotgun off his shoulder and into his hands. With a pull of the trigger, the first German soldier was blasted off his feet, his body spinning like a rag doll. The second paratrooper's eyes widened in disbelief, but before he could react, Jack fired again. The blast echoed through the stillness of the forest. Two more bodies hit the ground. The sound of the shotgun's blast rang out through the forest, sending birds scattering into the cold night sky. Jack's breath came in sharp, quick bursts, visible in the frosty air. He didn't have time to savor the moment. His squad mates scrambled to action as the enemy's return fire sliced through the trees. The Germans had been caught off guard, but that advantage was fleeting. They would respond aggressively, as they always did. For a split second, there was confusion. The Germans had been positioned further away, behind snowdrifts and trees, and had clearly been expecting the Americans to be scattered and disorganized. The shotgun blast had thrown off their timing, but now the snare had been sprung. Jack ducked instinctively as a burst of automatic gunfire stitched the air above him, sending flecks of snow and dirt into his face. His eyes narrowed. This was just the beginning. He peered over the edge of his foxhole, trying to assess the situation. More Germans were pushing forward, creeping through the hedgerows, but there was something different about this attack. It wasn't the usual skirmish. This felt like a coordinated push. The Germans knew the Americans were entrenched here, and they had brought their elite paratroopers to flush them out. The thick trees of the Ardennes offered some cover, but not nearly enough against the tactical advance of the German forces. Jack knew they had to act fast or risk being overrun. He motioned to his squad. "We need to fall back to the secondary position now." The men moved quickly, some firing as they went, while others kept their heads low, ducking under the fire that sprayed around them. Jack's mind raced, his thoughts blurring together. How had the Germans gotten so close without being detected? It was the shotguns. The close range had thrown them off. They had expected rifles, precision shots, not the devastation of a shotgun blast. As they maneuvered through the forest, Jack adjusted his shotgun, which felt almost too familiar in his hands, as though it had become an extension of his own will. The sound of another shot echoed, followed by the sickening thud of a body hitting the ground. Jack's heart tightened in his chest, his breath short as he moved through the shadows, his senses heightened. The shotgun was all he had. Its brutal effectiveness in this environment had made it a valuable weapon, but now it felt like his only lifeline. Suddenly there was a sharp yell, a German voice hoarse with anger. Jack's blood ran cold as the figures emerged from the shadows. A squad of 5 German paratroopers, their faces pale in the moonlight, had flanked his squad's position. They were charging, rifles raised. Jack didn't hesitate. He leveled the shotgun and fired, the blast powerful enough to knock 2 of the Germans to the ground in an instant. The other 3 kept coming, but Jack's squad opened fire, forcing the paratroopers to scatter. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and smoke, the cold seeping deeper into their bones. Jack barely noticed it now. His focus was on the immediate threat, the enemy closing in. The Germans, who had mocked the shotgun as a farmer's weapon, were quickly learning its brutal efficiency. Jack's next shot cut down another attacker, and the remaining 2 paratroopers ducked behind a fallen log, trying to regroup. Jack advanced, moving cautiously but steadily, shotgun raised, his men following in lockstep behind him. The paratroopers were desperate now, realizing that their precision fire was being rendered useless by the close quarters nature of the fight. They had never encountered anything like this, a weapon that could tear through their ranks in an instant, a weapon they had once mocked. The desperation in their eyes mirrored the growing tension in Jack's chest. He motioned to his squad to push forward, signaling that they needed to keep the momentum going. No time for hesitation, no time for second thoughts. The Germans weren't backing down, but neither were they. The forest was eerily quiet now, the kind of quiet that sends shivers down your spine. The snow continued to fall in heavy sheets, but it was no longer soft. It had hardened into an icy crust underfoot, crunching beneath the soldiers' boots. The air was thick with the stench of smoke and the pungent scent of blood, and Jack's breath came in heavy, labored gasps, each one visible in the freezing air. The Model 97 shotgun, still clutched firmly in his hands, was caked in grime, yet it had not faltered. He had fired it countless times that night, and it had answered every call, leaving death in its wake. Jack's squad had pushed forward, advancing deeper into the heart of the forest as they fought tooth and nail to hold their ground. The Germans, now on their heels, had regrouped and were attempting to make one final push to seize control of the area. Their assault was relentless, but Jack and his men were determined. They had already tasted victory, and they would not be denied again. Ahead, Jack spotted a small rise in the terrain, a ridge that could offer them a strategic advantage. But it wasn't going to be easy to get there. The Germans had anticipated the move and had positioned snipers along the tree line. Jack's eyes scanned the shadows, the darkness playing tricks on his tired mind. He could hear the distant crack of a rifle shot, followed by the whiz of a bullet passing just overhead. "Move out now," Jack shouted, his voice hoarse but commanding. He led the charge, his squad following closely behind as they ran for the ridge. Another gunshot rang out, and one of Jack's men, Private Daniels, dropped to the ground, clutching his side. His scream was cut short by the cold, harsh reality of the battlefield. Jack's heart skipped a beat as he saw his comrade fall. Without thinking, he ran toward Daniels, ignoring the dangers around him. The shotgun was a comforting weight in his hands, and it gave him the strength to push forward. As he reached Daniels, he could see the blood soaking through the young soldier's uniform. It was too late. The wound was mortal. "I'm sorry, kid," Jack muttered, but he couldn't afford to stay there. The Germans were closing in, and he needed to move his men to safety. He stood up, dragging Daniel's lifeless body to the side, and shouted to his squad, "Get to that ridge, now!" The men sprinted for the rise, but the Germans had anticipated their move. The next wave of enemy soldiers burst from the tree line, weapons raised. The crack of rifles filled the air, and the sound of grenades exploding was deafening. Jack and his men dove behind trees and rocks, their hearts pounding in their chests. The Model 97 shotgun roared again, and another German paratrooper was knocked to the ground. The blast sent the soldier tumbling backward, his rifle falling from his hands. Jack didn't hesitate. He moved forward, keeping low, knowing that his squad depended on him. One by one, the Germans fell, their mocking sneers turning to terror as the shotgun proved its worth in the brutal, unforgiving forest. The Germans were faltering now, their assault slowing, but Jack wasn't about to let up. He knew that if they gave the enemy even a moment to regroup, it could be their last. He had seen it happen too many times before. He had seen brave men, fall to complacency and hesitation. With a final burst of adrenaline, Jack led the charge to the ridge, firing his shotgun at anything that moved. The Germans, now realizing the tide was turning, began to retreat, their disciplined formations breaking apart as chaos erupted around them. Jack and his squad pressed on, pushing them back into the darkness of the forest. The battle had raged for hours, but now, as the last of the German soldiers disappeared into the snow, Jack allowed himself a brief moment of relief. His squad had survived. They had fought against overwhelming odds and had come out victorious. The enemy had underestimated the power of the shotgun, and now they would learn to fear it. But Jack's victory came at a heavy cost. His squad was reduced to only a handful of men, the rest lying lifeless in the snow. He looked out at the carnage, the bodies of both his comrades and the enemy strewn across the battlefield. It was a grim sight, but it was the price of war. The cold was unbearable, and the relentless snow began to fall harder, as if nature itself was trying to wash away the bloodshed that had stained the Ardennes forest. Jack Mitchell stood on the ridge, the shotgun still clutched in his gloved hands, though its weight had long ceased to offer any comfort. His breath came in ragged gasps, his chest tight with exhaustion. The brutal firefight had taken its toll, and yet amid the destruction there was something oddly still in the aftermath, a silent moment of clarity, if only for a second. The battlefield was littered with the bodies of both Germans and Americans. The once pristine white snow was now marred by blood, a testament to the brutality that war demanded. Jack surveyed the area, his eyes scanning the bodies of the fallen, both enemy and comrade alike. Some of his men were dead, their bodies positioned unnaturally in the snow, faces frozen in expressions of pain and disbelief. He saw Daniels still lying on the cold ground, his young face forever locked in that moment of terror before his death. Jack couldn't dwell on it, though. He had to keep moving, keep his focus. He had to think of the men who were still alive, those who had made it through the chaos and now needed his leadership more than ever. There was no time to grieve. Not now. He motioned for the remaining members of his squad to regroup, and they moved silently toward him, their faces grim and hollow. Some of them were badly wounded, blood seeping through torn uniforms, but they stood strong, determined. They had seen their brothers fall beside them, but they hadn't given up. They had kept fighting just like Jack. "Get to the rally point," Jack barked. "We've still got a job to do." The men nodded, moving with purpose as they began the slow march back through the forest. The gunfire had ceased for now, but Jack knew better than to think it was over. The Germans would regroup and they would come again. The fight was far from finished. But for now, he allowed himself one brief moment to look back at the carnage they had left behind. The shotgun, the very weapon that had been mocked just hours ago, had proven its worth. It had done what it was designed to do. It had torn through the German lines, left them in disarray, and provided Jack and his men with the advantage they needed to survive. What had started as a tool of ridicule had turned into a tool of survival, the weapon of choice in the brutal, unforgiving forest where range was irrelevant and death was close. As they moved forward, Jack's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. What if they had waited too long? What if more men had been lost? His grip on the shotgun tightened almost subconsciously. He had used it to kill, to survive, but it also reminded him of the men who had died fighting alongside him, the friends he had known and lost. But despite the loss, despite the pain, there was still a glimmer of hope. Jack Mitchell had lived to see another day. He had fought and he had survived. And in the midst of this brutal conflict, that was something to hold on to. As they reached the rally point, Jack looked over at his squad. They were battered, bruised, and broken, but they were alive. And in this war, that was all that mattered. The Germans had mocked his farmer's shotgun. They had underestimated it, and by extension, they had underestimated the men who carried it. But they would learn. And Jack Mitchell, along with the rest of the squad, would make sure of that.